My name is Lara Carlson. I'm going to facilitate session 3. Just following up on the conversation we've started this morning. So we've heard from impacted communities about not, at that time, being sure where to start, where to find the resources, understanding that it was going to be a high cost of cleanup and where to get funding to help with that. So our goal is to make sure that for future communities dealing with these problems, there's an easier, more accessible way to take immediate action through opportunities like what we're learning today. So we have a few more speakers here. The focus of this next program is talking about finding that funding, understanding the regulatory requirements, talking about that crisis communication a little more, and then talking about the issue of liability and how people are held accountable for PFAS pollution. So we have 3 speakers. The first is going to be Jim Richie. He's the director of the DNR's Bureau of Community Financial Assistance, so helping to administer the DNR's grant and loan programs. Following Jim, we're going to hear from Stephen Acquario, who came here all the way from New York to help us understand what his work has been helping the counties as the New York State Association of Counties Executive Director. And he also has some experience with PFAS litigation. And then finally, we will hear from Erin Dickinson, who is an owner and founding partner at Crueger Dickinson, LLC in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And she has focused on litigation representing local government clients, including in PFAS cases. So I'm going to pass it over to Jim to get started.
Thank you, Laura. Can you hear me okay? Thanks. Good afternoon. It's really great to be with all of you. It's really exciting to see such a good turnout and that you stuck around after lunch, too. I really have appreciated all of the speakers and presentations so far today, as I know everybody else has as well. As we heard from Secretary Payne and the other DNR speakers, we are happy that there is some funding available to help with addressing PFAS. Our team, Matt Markham, Becky Scott, and the rest of our team and I have had the chance to talk with many of you here over the recent months who are working on addressing PFAS problems in your communities or preparing to address PFAS. And we know that can be a daunting task. It can be challenging and scary, and we saw the results on how important working through the funding opportunities is to all of you. And we look forward to continue to working with all of you, problem solving and addressing to try to utilize the funding that's available as best we can. In the funding arena, it's been really an extraordinary past year and a half or so since the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, or the bill funding as we'll refer to it, in late 2021. The bill is providing $50 billion for water infrastructure nationwide over the next 5 years. It's the single largest investment in water infrastructure by the federal government to date. And much of that funding will flow through the State Revolving Fund, or SRF, loan program, including funding that is specific to emerging contaminants or specifically PFAS, which is what I'll be focusing on today. First, just a couple of quick words about our existing State Revolving Fund loan program. It's probably familiar to many of you here. The programs have been around for a couple of decades. It includes our Clean Water Fund and Safe Drinking Water loan programs. These provide low-interest loans for municipal wastewater, municipal drinking water projects. And in recent years, we've been really excited about our private lead service line replacement funding program. Our program provides subsidized or lower interest rates than what most communities could get on the open market. Our current interest rates are listed there. We provide loan terms for 20 or 30-year loans, terms depending on the design life of the project. And a really important part of this program, we heard Mayor Katie talk about it earlier, is portions of our loans are able to be given out as principal forgiveness, essentially grant funding, right? That doesn't have to be paid back. That's really a key element of our program, an important part of the bill funding. The rest of the loan funding, however, it comes back in repayments annually over 20 or 30 years, and it revolves back into the program and is available for additional projects. The bipartisan infrastructure law, again, it was passed at the federal level in late 2021. Much of last year was spent EPA and the various federal agencies creating guidance, direction to the states like us in terms of how we're going to utilize that funding. And the bill funding is really split into 5 categories for water infrastructure. The first 2 are called supplemental or additional funding for the existing clean water and safe drinking water loan programs. The range in dollars that are listed here are over 5 years, and so in most cases the funding increases from year 1 to year 5. The next 2 are what we're really interested in today. It's for emerging contaminants, first for clean water, which is EPA's term for wastewater, and the second is for drinking water. And so both of those funds are available starting this year for 5 years, and the funding increases a little bit over those 5 years. The last category or bucket of bill funding is for lead service lines. We're super excited in Wisconsin to continue the momentum of replacing lead service lines like Wausau and so many other communities in the state have been working on. Just a quick note, that column on the right that says mandatory, the bill requires that a certain percentage of this additional funding is given out as principal forgiveness. And it's exciting that for the emerging contaminants, it's 100%. So EPA requires that 100% of the emerging contaminants funding that comes to the states and gets passed on to communities is given out as essentially grant funding that doesn't have to be paid back, which is so valuable to the communities. And I'll talk about in just a second how we're utilizing our existing loan program to stretch those dollars even further. I want to mention, in addition to the revolving loan funds, there's another grant program that some of you may have heard about in recent months. It's for small and disadvantaged communities. It's referred to as the Emerging Contaminants SDC Grant Program. And as the name implies, it's really geared towards communities that are smaller, population less than 10,000, or that meet the state's disadvantage criteria. And we have certain criteria parameters that we look at to determine if a community can meet that. We are estimated to receive about $12.6 million per year through this grant program, and the first 2 years are available now. We'll be accepting applications in June. So how are we utilizing this bill funding? We recognize the need right off the bat to really focus initially on drinking water. So the DW here stands for drinking water emerging contaminants. So over the past year, we've been working internally at DNR and with many of you to provide input and feedback on the program and established our drinking water emerging contaminants funding program. And it's live. I'll talk about status in a moment, but the first couple of awards are actually going out the door as we speak. So these are the types of projects that are eligible for funding, and I'll just highlight them quickly. Of course, construct or upgrade treatment facilities. That's going to be a majority of the projects we anticipate seeing. Add a drinking water treatment facility, add a municipal well. But it could also involve other things like developing a new source, constructing a new municipal well, consolidating with another system. Maybe the neighboring system to yours doesn't have the same PFAS problems, and connecting for your community may be an option. Or creating a new public water system. That's certainly an option for some of the townships that are here or that are experiencing PFAS that currently are all on private wells. Also point out that while the infrastructure program is really focused on construction activities, the initial engineering, the analysis that you all have to do to get to that construction project is eligible, just not as a standalone funding project, unfortunately, but it can be included when you have an actual project and you submit an application. A little bit about the status of where we're at. We're really in the first year of that 5 years of bill funding right now. So our first round of applications was January of this year. We received applications for 4 projects from 3 municipalities. They're represented here today for $22.9 million, and we are in the process of awarding those loans as we speak. Looking ahead, our next application cycle is not too far down the road. Applications will be due on June 30th of this year. It's a requirement of our program to submit what we call an intent to apply, essentially a pre-application. And typically those are due October of every year. given that the emerging contaminants funding is new and it's evolving, we're essentially able to waive that deadline. You still have to submit an intent to apply, but you can do that really at any point in time up to that June 30th deadline. To date, we have intent to applies or pre-applications from 14 municipalities around the state, which is exciting. Unfortunate that we're in that position, but it's exciting that we're seeing a number of communities that are utilizing the funding that's available. All of this is explained in what we call our intended use plan, or IUP. It's available on our website. And this year's IUP is actually being posted today as we speak for public comment. So by the end of the day, it'll be out on our website. I won't go into too much detail about our funding approach, but the short answer, or the summary of our funding approach is every municipality that applies will receive some amount of principal forgiveness or grant funding, essentially. The balance of the project costs will be through our regular safe drinking water low interest loan funding. Each community can receive up to $5.1 million in principal forgiveness. That will depend on how many applications we receive, project costs, and so on, but that's the maximum amount, $5.1 million in grant funding, essentially. Again, our intended use plan that explains all this in more detail, if you're interested, is available on our website, and we will be hosting an informational webinar it's coming up on Thursday, May 18th at 1 p.m., and the details will be on our webpage. That's what we've been working on for the drinking water emerging contaminants program. We have also been working to develop our, what EPA, or we call our clean water emerging contaminants program, which is really for wastewater facilities. That program development is almost done. We will be posting our intended use plan, our explanation of that program, in about a month, around June 1st. Similar to drinking water, it's going to focus on PFAS. And the awards will also be a mix of that principal forgiveness and the low interest loan funding. Applications for clean water funding are due September 30th of every year. And some of the types of projects that will be eligible for the wastewater, the clean water emerging contaminants, includes, again, projects at wastewater treatment plants to remove PFAS. But also stormwater. So projects that would implement best management practices to reduce PFAS in runoff from publicly owned facilities. Potentially airports are a source of PFAS stormwater runoff. Can also include funding for projects at landfills, as well as projects to prevent PFAS from entering the wastewater collection system. So typical I&I, inflow and infiltration type projects that would remove PFAS as well from the system. And wrap up just with a couple things about outreach and some information that is available for everybody. I'd really suggest directing you to our monthly electronic bulletin, our e-bulletin newsletter. We put this out about monthly. The web address is listed here. You can just go to our DNR website too and search for this as well. We try to put all of the deadlines, all of our forms, explanations of our new programs as they're being developed in our newsletter. And then especially if you remember anything from my presentation, it's our website. So listed at the top here is a new web page for our bipartisan infrastructure law funding. We also have a handout that's available on the back table, which essentially has a summary of everything on our web page. And that resource guide that was mentioned, it's also listed right on that page as well. So all of the information that I just shared and a lot more is available on our web page. So thank you again for the opportunity to be with you today. I will hand it over to Steve and then look forward to taking questions. Thank you. Thanks. Do you have slides?
Yeah, they're on there somewhere, thanks.
Let's see here.
Around you, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Afternoon, everybody. Thank you very, very much. It's very great to be here. I've come from far away to the faraway place. Great to be here. Mayor Rosenberg, wonderful dinner last night at Lemongrass. Put a plug in there. Yeah, I see a lot of thumbs going up. Yeah, fabulous. Great place. Wonderful place to visit. While I was there, I had 3 large glasses of tap water. Knowing what I know, I did that. Why did I do it? I don't know. I did it because I'm supposed to be drinking clean water. Do you see my point? We're not trained to think that water should be impure. We're trained to drink water because we need water to live. It's the same with air. I had 3 tall glasses. I got back to my room and I said, that's interesting. So this is an important conference. It's an important topic. I applaud all of you for taking the time to be here. Throughout this whole day, the session, the morning panelists, the speakers, the topics, all so important. Take the time to learn. Most people are not taking the time to learn. Back home, a typical day over the years would be a phone call from a county commissioner or a county executive. Steve, I just got a letter from the state. They discovered PFAS at the fire training center. After the letter came the next one, you are responsible for the remediation of that property. 2 weeks later, Dutchess County calls again. Steve, we got another letter. Airport, General Aviation Airport, preschool, special daycare across the street from the airport. PFAS detected. Greene County. Steve, we got a letter from the state. Remediation, fire training center. Town drinking water right there next to the fire training center impacted from the fire training exercises, volunteer firefighters. Putnam County, Rockland County, the village of Nyack, on and on and on across New York State. Same thing's happening here. I venture to guess is probably the same as maybe what Kyle, I think, mentioned earlier, that 20% of us will be impacted by this, and 80% hopefully will not. But we don't know. It's invisible. It's under the water. It's completely mixable in groundwater, completely, and migrates. Let me give you an example of that. I took a call from a town, rural town in Westchester County. Steve, we discovered PFAS. We don't have a fire department. We don't have a fire training facility. We don't have any industry. Pretty high threshold, too, of detect. Start thinking it through, ask him a couple questions. I said, was there anything? Remember, forever chemical. Does not go away. Guy called me back. He said, I remember in the 1970s, an airplane crash. They used firefighting foam to douse that airplane, and that was the reason for the detect. Look, folks, this is not a Democrat issue. It's not a Republican issue. It's a people issue. Private wells are untested, as we heard multiple times from the state this morning. Whether it's in Wisconsin, they're not tested. They're not tested in New York either. My brother Adam called me about 3 months ago. Steve, are my children going to be okay? I said, what are you talking about? PFAS detect school water system. High school, grade school, several schools in New York State have a detect in the community water system in the school, whether private wells that were used for the children or a community water source. I was telling Jennifer, who I was sitting with from the Marathon County Board at lunch, I live about 5 miles from Cohoes, New York. Cohoes, New York is where Norlight is. Who is, anyone know? Incinerating PFAS. Well, you saw the chart and the life cycle of PFAS. We know it goes through wastewater treatment, out the other end with an 11 parts per trillion in the biosolid, Well, what do you think happens when it goes up? A smokestack comes right back down into the Section 8 housing and the apartments that are in that community. New York State banned incineration of PFAS. We don't know where this stuff is being disposed of right now, anywhere. A couple of years back, I've been working on this for about 7 years. A couple of years back, states started doing a voluntary collection after Hoosick Falls. If you haven't heard of Hoosick Falls, look up Hoosick Falls. That's about a half hour from my house. Like the epicenter of PFAS in our state where it all started. But it is a situation where it's everywhere. We don't know where to dispose of it. The state started to do a voluntary collection from the volunteer fire departments. I don't know if Wisconsin has done that, but we tried to get it out of the volunteer fire departments. It's still there, all over the state. If you talk to volunteer firefighters in your community, go back and ask them to look around. If they got any drums of this stuff, it's toxic. We're talking about parts per trillion here, folks. The first contaminant ever to be measured in parts per trillion. Research has shown that PFAS is toxic. It has an adverse health effect. We know this now. We've tested it on animals. We're beginning to see it on humans. It's persistent. That's why they call it the forever chemical. It's bioaccumulative. It stays around and builds in us. The long-term exposure has been linked to adverse health effects. There is presently, as Cindy mentioned, and others, there's no enforceable federal drinking water standard for any PFAS component at this time. But this is going to change. And Wisconsin water districts and local governments must be ready, and you're doing that today. Because of a lack of federal MCLs, the states have acted. And that's this slide here. 30 states have developed some guidance. 8 states have MCLs. Massachusetts, Michigan, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, where I'm from, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont, all above the proposed US EPA's threshold. New York is 10 parts per trillion. Since 2020, mandatory quarterly water testing, all community water systems. You need to test. You need to test to find it. In 2018, I went to a US EPA summit when President Trump was here. They were talking about it then, taking action. I was there to represent local governments. In 2021, as folks have said earlier, the US EPA laid out a PFAS roadmap, namely targeting 2 PFAS chemicals that have been the most studied, PFOA and PFOS. The EPA has announced in just this past March that the MCLs are going to be 4 parts per trillion. As Cindy mentioned earlier, folks, that's 0. It's 0. When I was out talking to local government officials, not that long ago, as I'm sure Erin has been, we're good. We're under the 400 parts per trillion. We're good. We're under the 70 parts per trillion. I couldn't have the conversation with them because of the inconsistency of the guidelines. You're not good until you're at 0, as Cindy and others have talked about. The MCL is going to be 4 parts per trillion at the end of this year, but the goal is 0. If you look at their goal, US EPA MCL G, that's an important thing to understand, the G. The G is 0 detect. When this is finalized, this will be the first drinking water standard at the federal government level for any contaminant since 1996, when the current process for establishing standards was created. Since the PFAS roadmap was announced in June of '22, The EPA drastically lowered its health advisories, which is what Wisconsin follows right now, at 70 parts per trillion. Those have been lowered to 4 parts per trillion for PFOA and 2 parts per trillion for PFOS. So refresh. Let's think about this level of detected, just how low it is. And I'm not a scientist. I'm an attorney. I'm an environmental lawyer. But we heard about it from Michael. I think he was mentioning a part per trillion, 1 part of PFAS for every 1 trillion parts of water or soil in which it's contained. 1 part per trillion is 1,000 times smaller than 1 parts per billion. This is minuscule detect stuff. Mark O'Connell from the Wisconsin Counties Association, and I see its chairman, Plimmel's here today. Lance, thank you for being here and for supporting this conference. He suggested I come here, not because he's my friend, but because he knows that I would like all the work I did on this environmental contaminant for these past years. I could share my knowledge, and the timing couldn't be better as I woke up this morning on the morning news, seeing that the ratepayers are being asked to fund more for a contaminant that they didn't cause in their drinking water, and that those that did contaminate should be responsible. I've worked for decades with my counterpart in Wisconsin, Mark O'Connell. We're fierce protectors of local governments who serve the people in their communities. We fight for the environment and for public health. And on public nuisance, Mark and I partnered recently to address a public nuisance concern killing our people, and that was opioids. We did something about it. We filed the largest mass tort in the history of the federal court system, and we won. PFAS poses an even greater harm than what opioids did to our family and friends. Anyone want to guess how or why? Think community water systems. It affects more people at once. I've reached out to the same lawyers who brought those opioid cases. In my case, the Napoli law firm, Erin Dickinson was involved with that as well, to take on the actors that are responsible for polluting our drinking water, and we hope to have a similar outcome. An MDL, multi-district, large, federal, consolidated case has been formed in South Carolina. This was formed in 2018. It's mature, it's moving, and it's moving fast. Look, folks, this is just the beginning. To the end of this year, the MCL is going to affect for PFOA and PFOS. The EPA is separately moving on a parallel track to designate PFOA and PFOS as hazardous substances. New York already designated them as hazardous substances, but now the United States is going to designate them as a hazardous substance, triggering federal Superfund for cleanup. How costly is it? Let me just use my state. It's much like yours, same thing. Milwaukee, New York City, rest of the state. We're just exactly the same. If you've ever been to upstate New York, it's just like this. To comply with the proposed federal MCLs, it's likely to cost $1.5 billion for our small water systems and large water systems, not including ongoing maintenance. The good news, it can be removed. You've heard from our mayor here. It can be removed. The granulated activated carbon does work. The bad news is it can be expensive. Should the ratepayers be responsible for this? Interimly, sure, they have to be. But others should be as well. It can be costly and expensive. Where's this money going to come from? Thankfully, Jim's here to announce some funds from the state. Some of the recent Federal Infrastructure Act has been talked about earlier today. Will provide some pass-through funds. Maybe your state's revolving loan funds for water is another source. Maybe your United States Senator or members of Congress can help in identifying funds. Takes a lot of work to chase down money, but nothing will come close to what the Water District will need to comply with the new MCL. And I talk about this all over the country. $10 million, $20 million. ongoing maintenance, 100,000 a year, maybe. Aqueous film forming foam. Anybody know what that is? We talked about that earlier. This is the firefighting foam. It's the miracle, magical foam. It works better than anything the humans have ever designed to extinguish a fire. It's been around since the 50s. Still being used in New York, Wisconsin, all around the United States. But they're phasing it out. They're trying to limit its use to extraordinary circumstances where that foam can be used to save human life. That's what this, one of the first cases, and Erin will mention this in a few minutes, it's largely one manufacturer of this type of foam, 3M. What did 3M know about its toxicity? When did they know it? What did they do about it? Who and when did they warn? We'll find that out through this court process. And lastly, drinking water is the first test in this federal court action. Personal injuries will be the next through these types of actions. But then, folks, it's airports who have the contamination. Remember, just because the foam was used on an airport doesn't mean it's not going to migrate right off that airport in that plume moving all around. They don't know where it goes. We can't map it under the earth. But airports is next. Our landfills. The state of New York has tested PFAS in thousands of New York closed, inactive landfills. Check out that report, New York Inactive Landfill Report, PFAS. And by the way, check out some of the other information on the state's Department of Health website on PFAS and the Department of Environmental Conservation website for PFAS as they check out Wisconsin's. The states talk to each other. Check it out. There's good information on what we've learned in New York. Airports, landfills, we've heard from Michael earlier, wastewater treatment, our biosolids, at the end of it, where do you think we're putting the biosolids? Right out into the farms, into farmland. And who's eating that? We are. I learned today, biosolids, 11 parts per trillion. Major ag state like Wisconsin. Firefighting personal injury and fire training facilities is also on the list for us to try to get those responsible accountable for what they've caused in our communities. I work with the National Rural Water Association. If you Google National Rural Water Association PFAS, that's where you can learn more about what we're doing this around the United States and in New York. So it's a pleasure to be with you here today. I can't tell you how great this session was, the topics that you're tackling. I talked with a legislator at my table saying, well, I've been monitoring this and watching this for a while now, and I really didn't know all this stuff. Neither do I. And that's why we're here. We're trying to understand more about it. Do you think my wife understands water contamination in the tap? No, and she shouldn't have to, or our children. But somebody has to. And that's us in this room and in government. So I want to applaud you for this excellent conference and for having me here. I want to thank Mark O'Connell for his support and his dedication to this. And I'll turn it over. Oh, let me, real quickly, on these slides here, these are the states who've acted in red with their own. The orange following the US, the white basically just following the federal government. Well, I can't get it to change, so we'll leave it at that. I just had a few comments from other state slides in there, but I want to save some time for Erin and take some time for questions. Erin?
Okay, let's see if I can advance the PowerPoint. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me? I get the enviable position of after lunch and after two speakers talking about litigation. Horrible set of circumstances for all of you. I am going to try to keep this brief because I know we want to get to questions. I am Erin Dickinson. I have been representing 67 of the Wisconsin counties in a very important piece of litigation for the last 5 years over opioids, as Steve Acquario mentioned. 2 years ago, ago, I was approached about taking on another really, really large cause on behalf of county governments, and that is PFAS. Today, I was asked not to come here to get into the details of all that, but just to provide a high-level overview of what has been happening in the court system. We often get county clients, I have county clients kind of all around the United States that call with the problems we heard about today. I'm getting calls from my residents. I have a detection now. What do I do? Those sorts of things. And frankly, we've been watching this unfold over the last few years with dismay because all of you are in a very, very tough position. You feel very powerless, I know, from talking to a lot of our clients. I get to feel powerful because I get to do something about it, even if it's only a small part to help. I get to go to court and try to get redress for the communities that have this issue against the manufacturers of these chemicals. And I'm just going to run through a quick set of slides that talks about what we've been doing. Again, I sit in an enviable position in a way because I get to feel like I'm doing something. I know a lot of you have sat in your shoes and felt like, I feel powerless. I don't know what to do. This is overwhelming. So in my world, I get to take a piece of it and make it less overwhelming. Is it the solution to everyone's problems in the world on this topic? I would be lying if I said it was, but it is an important step, we believe, or we would not have been spending the last few years on this topic. I wanted to go over just a few basics. The key defendants. I think a lot of folks mentioned these today. Tyco, ChemGuard, DuPont and Chemours, 3M. They are the manufacturers of a lot of these chemicals. There are a slew of others. But those are the key defendants in litigation around the country. Now, of course, I'm not advancing here, but I'm going to do my best. You all may have heard about litigation in the past. There had been some really big notable cases prior to this latest wave of litigation. The state of Minnesota sued 3M over this and achieved a really big result, $850 million. That sounds huge. But as the numbers that folks have thrown out here today, it's almost a drop in the bucket. There were a number of private lawsuits that you all may have watched the documentary movie Dark Waters. When I first got involved in this issue, I remember watching it after I had met Rob Bilott, who was litigating a lot of these cases. That resulted in a $670 million result. But again, these are drops in the bucket with what everyone is dealing with. And they were the first, so they're notable. This newer frontier of litigation has a couple different arms. A lot of folks have talked about AFFF today. That's a huge arm of this litigation. If you have an AFFF situation today in the United States and want to bring litigation, you will end up in federal court in South Carolina, where we've been for the last 3 years. It is moved with a lot of work, a lot of legal issues, and a lot of what we call discovery over the last few years, and trials are finally starting there. There are also sort of a separate but parallel track of cases that have nothing to do with AFFF. We represent clients in this situation, and this is around the country, sort of. These cases are taking place in your locality. So, for example, those are cases where there's a plant that contaminated or discharged PFAS. I have a case in Cumberland County, North Carolina, where the Chemours plant is. And the Chemours plant discharged chemicals for years and years and years. And now there are a number of counties suing Chemours over that discharge. Well, that case is located in North Carolina because it has nothing to do with this AFFF. So there's kind of two fronts. The AFFF consolidated litigation, which all of the cases went to one place, and then there are dozens of cases around the country, probably approaching at least 100, that are just individual plant contamination or landfills or things of that nature. Just to give you a quick idea, in this multi-district litigation, which I'm sure some of you have heard of, but some of you haven't, it just means that cases all go to one spot, and all of the things that get done in every case are done at once together with one judge. And then they go back to their places for trial. So in this consolidated litigation, there are 12 airports. There are 217 cases brought by local governments, which is sort of the most relevant to this group. 21 cases brought by state attorneys general. We'll talk about that in a minute. The state of Wisconsin has 2 of these cases, and it's really important that the state has taken action. And then a slew of other cases that I think Mr. Acquario was starting to get to. I wanted to quickly hit, I know we're running short on time, so I wanted to quickly hit a couple things. In Wisconsin, there have been a number of notable cases filed already. The city of La Crosse is a client of mine, actually, and we filed that case back in 2021. That case then, of course, got sucked into the federal court MDL, and hopefully one day will come back for trial if it doesn't resolve. Right after that, the next year, the state of Wisconsin sued Tyco over the situation that you all have been dealing with for a really long time in Peshtigo and Marinette. So that's the state attorney general going after these companies, and this has been a really important piece of litigation for Wisconsin. Dane County has filed a case. I think I sat with some folks from there today. That is also in the MDL. That was filed in 2022. And then the state filed another case against 3M and some other manufacturers, also in 2022. So a lot going on. Then the final one that I had that's of notable mention is the city of Peshtigo, which Cindy and others talked about earlier today, and it's been a travesty, and we're so glad that case has gone to litigation. I just wanted to give a quick sort of, when you talk about what's been going on, because I think Steve alluded to it, the multi-district litigation's been going on for like 4 years. What's been happening? Why is this taking so long? Is a lot of what I get from my clients whose cases they didn't choose to send it to South Carolina. They want their case back, and so we have no control over that until the cases come back. They're in South Carolina, but really, really important work has been done that actually has advanced the cases for everyone. The defendants had a lot of legal defenses that they wanted to assert early on. The biggest one in the short hand is called the government contractor defense. It's essentially a defense that says, if you gave me specifications, we manufactured it to your specifications, you government entities, we're not liable. Well, after years of briefing on that subject that I personally worked on, it was tossed. The judge said, no, manufacturers, you can be liable. This is not a defense that's going to proceed. That was a huge result for all of the municipal cases. So that just happened this year. Wanted to give you all a sense of the next steps in the AFFF litigation, and then I'll talk about the other. What happens with these cases is test cases are selected in this big multi-district litigation. That has happened in the federal court. So the first test cases are going to trial. Unfortunately, none of them are mine. I feel very sad about it. But those cases are kind of used to decide, can we win these cases? How can we win these cases? What kind of dollar figure can we win in these cases? And so they're extremely useful for everybody that's brought a case. So exciting times. I think Stephen Acquario said it best, things are finally moving in this world. If the test cases don't drive a resolution that is acceptable to municipalities, the cases come back and we as trial lawyers get to try them. I hope I get that chance. This is a case where I hope I get that chance. So I wanted to give you that quick update. The cases generally, I know there's been a lot of talk about, our clients always ask this question, we haven't been measuring how much this has cost us, or we haven't done an assessment yet about how much this is going to cost. In our cases and in litigation, the case generally focuses on resolving what we call the public nuisance. So how do we get clean drinking water to the public? It can take a number of avenues, frankly. We've done, lots of people mentioned GAC, but we've also had cases where the plan is to instill a public water system. This is municipality specific. One solution for one municipality is not right for the other, but the goal of the litigation is to get a solution that the responsible party pays for that works. So it's, as you can imagine, a very lengthy, very time-consuming process. In all of our cases, this takes years sometimes, and we're finally getting there. But it's usually forward-looking. No entity that we're involved with has had to sort of go back and create a damages model from the past. It's just impossible to do, we've found in our cases. I think people all hit this sufficiently. The case for litigation, if you're contemplating it, has gotten stronger by the fact that new stringent standards are coming out. It is one of those, you are going to be answering to this issue. I'm going to skip over the 2 slides about the requirements because I think we've talked a lot about that. But it is the time, if you're thinking about this, to start taking action. I always give people the 2 seconds of why litigation might be important from my perspective, since I've been doing this for years now. This was largely true in the opioid case, but is probably more specifically true here, where individually affected communities need to participate for this to be effective. One is a little bit, since I represent a lot of counties, I always say the best defense is a good offense. If people are in your community are calling you saying, why the heck is this going on here? It feels good and it is appropriate to take action directing it towards the responsible parties. I know all of you sitting in this room are not the responsible party for putting PFAS in water. So it is empowering, but it is important, and it's important for your citizens to know that you're doing something about the problem. This is just one of the somethings. We've talked about a lot of somethings today that you all are gonna do, and they're probably more important even than this. But it is one of the somethings you can do. It's an expensive problem and it's not going away. I mean, we're talking about all these buckets in which you can help to piece together a solution. This is simply just one of them. The litigation obviously seeks accountability, and I feel pretty strongly that folks should be held accountable. Litigation can give meaningful dollars. We've been talking through solutions in certain communities that are really, really meaningful. And I hope I'm able to return some of those solutions at the end of some of these cases. People always ask this, so I just put this on the slide, the statute of limitations. People always say, if I'm sitting here as a government entity, when does my time clock start running to do something? The true answer is, in a public nuisance case, when it's an ongoing problem, your statute of limitations probably has not run. But you are going to hear the argument of, back in 2017, you all were having town hall meetings and you knew about this problem and you didn't do anything if you choose to litigate a case at a later date. So we always say to people, it is always best to do something soon. For that reason. You don't hear the defense as much, you don't hear that coming back at you. And finally, the reason that this is really important, and I know we worked a lot with the Counties Association, Stephen worked a lot with his Counties Association when we put together this to take on the pharmaceutical industry and opioids. Strength is in numbers. If these companies end up with 217 local governments that sue them, in the end they win. Because it's not enough and it's not going to cost them enough. So please consider it. Again, you don't have to consider it with me, you don't have to consider it with Steve, just please consider it. It is something that can be very empowering, can be very important, and regardless, our law firm will be here fighting till this is over. It's a really, really important cause. So I put my information on there for questions. If you have questions that touch on any of these issues, don't hesitate to reach out. Again, thanks to all of the county clients that are in the room today. It's so great to see everyone's face, and thanks for the WCA for asking me to come to talk about this really boring topic for this afternoon. I hope I haven't bored you all to tears, and I think we'll try to take some questions. I know we're running pretty long, but thank you so much.
Were there questions from the audience? I know we're running up to our end of our time, but we can take one or two.
Sure, I have a question. Many of the potentially responsible parties here are municipalities that had fire departments with training grounds, counties and cities with municipal airports. And many of those municipalities are being dragged into this litigation and being forced to spend millions and millions of dollars defending themselves from this litigation. I know you mentioned that we're not the ones who did it, but that's not what's happening out there. We're being dragged into this litigation, and what do you say to all these municipalities here that this litigation isn't affecting us? It is, and it's going to be horrible.
I can take that, since it was sort of directed at the comment I made. To date, I have yet to have a municipal client be sued in this litigation. So that's just my starting point for the comment. It is a pretty clear path that the municipalities did not know about the dangers of PFAS and actively use this either firefighting foam or have it in their landfills or other things. I will take that defense all day of the municipalities that I represent if anyone ever decides to assert it. Again, I have not had a single municipality have a claim brought against them in any case that we've brought of that nature. So I guess I'm unfamiliar with that happening, but if to the extent it has happened, you have a darn good argument. And I understand everyone's ire at not wanting to be in this litigation, but I will tell you, it's coming. You have upset residents. Whether you sue the manufacturers or not, whether you point at the responsible parties or not, it may be coming your way. And it is much, much, much better to start that dialogue and control it from your perspective, in my view, and that's just my humble opinion, than to get sued first by a resident, by whoever else, and then respond to it with a case. So to me, it has always been in helping counsel people through a very difficult issue. It is better to be on the offense on this subject, but that's just my humble opinion. And again, it's just one person's opinion. So I don't know if anyone wants to comment or.
Well, I'll just add a little bit to what Erin mentioned. I've not seen that either. In my experience with this, with the municipality, we follow all the laws. We follow all the MSDS sheets that we were given by the manufacturers. They told us to wash it right off the airway strip, right into the environment. The stormwater runoff, out it goes into the environment. So we followed all the rules. As Erin mentioned, there still are no federal MCLs that are on the books. So we've got a very, very tight defense in that matter.
And next question.
Thank you for your presentations today. It's been fascinating to hear about these cases. My question is about, we have manufacturers and users who are in litigation and being held responsible for utilization of this product, but what are we doing? I'm sorry. What's happening with the lobbying arms? Are they being held accountable as accomplices and kind of complicit in this whole situation? Because we have that situation here in Wisconsin. We have a large group in Madison who do lobby on behalf of manufacturers, and they are they're part of this. So thank you.
Yes. So everyone could hear what happens about the lobbyists and the folks that are participating that aren't the manufacturers but are really working to undermine some of these laws, bills, et cetera. I will tell you, in nearly every horrendous case I have against industry, lobbyists and lobbying organizations and trade organizations that front the manufacturers are always there. It is every case, and it's really, really, the conduct is just as terrible as you point out. It is extremely hard through the legal system to sue based on lobbying. There's something called the Noor-Pennington Doctrine, and it's basically an immunity for folks that are lobbying. We had this happen with respect to Purdue Pharma and their lobbyists in the opioid litigation, and the conduct there was horrendous. And the minute you speak about lobbying to anyone in a court system, you are immediately shut down. So it's a very difficult claim to bring, if not impossible. But I think that's where the power of this room comes in, because legislators, politicians, your county's association, those are the kinds of people that can help combat some of the lobbying. The legal system can only do so much, but there's tremendous power in this room. That has nothing to do with the legal case. So that's what I would say. I mean, someone like Mr. Acquario in his state in New York probably has a lot to say about that.
Well, the only thing I'll add, Erin, thank you so much. You eloquently responded. They're going to fight us every step of the way, whether in Washington or in the State House around the United States. But what's happening in Washington, D.C., to me, is happening. And I think the lobbyists were not successful in killing that MCL.
Yeah.
All right, we've exhausted our time here, so
Exhausted everyone else, I'm sure.
so we're going to move on to our next presentation, but thank you so much for being here and for your presence today. We appreciate it. So we're going to pass it on. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.